Bride of Frankenstein has changed significantly since her first appearance in the original Frankenstein novel. From her inception, she has been tied to the role of women within society, and this has contributed to how her depictions have changed over time. Spoilers for the novel Frankenstein. I know it's over 200 years old, but that doesn't mean that everybody's read it. In Mary Shelley's original novel, there are two Brides of Frankenstein. The female creature stitched together from human parts as a mate for the male creature is most commonly given this name. The second is Elizabeth Lavenza, the bride of Victor Frankenstein, the creator. Despite being clearly separate in the book, these two brides act as doppelgangers. Unlike many of the film versions, in the book the female creature never receives animation and is instead torn to pieces by Victor, who feels that he cannot bring another of this kind into the world after the murders the first creature has committed. Elizabeth is similarly strangled by the male creature as an act of revenge. Both brides are destroyed, each by the other's groom. These parallels also reflect the parallels that are drawn between Victor and the male creature throughout the novel. If Frankenstein and the creature are one and the same, then so are Elizabeth and the bride. Of course, they are not the only female characters to be shortchanged in this novel. Victor's mother, Caroline, is killed off before the story even starts. Another character named Justine is framed for murder by the creature and subsequently hanged, just because she's pretty. There's a character called Agatha who is so unimportant that you can just pretend she's not there. There is a character called Sappy who has a fairly interesting story, but she's only in the book quite briefly. Elizabeth is probably the most important female character in the novel, and she's generally considered to be passive and underdeveloped. This is again paralleled by the female creature, who is so extremely passive that she is never even alive. I say paralleled because this is absolutely deliberate on Mary Shelley's part. She was the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft, one of the earliest true proto-feminists and the author of The Vindication of the Rights of Woman. Mary Shelley was heavily influenced by her mother's writing, and Frankenstein itself is viewed by a large number of scholars as having proto-feminist themes. The way female characters are pushed aside in the narrative, and in the cases of Elizabeth, the bride, and Justine, destroyed by male characters, is the point, or one of the points. It reflects the way that women were pushed aside and viewed as childlike by the society of the time. In the original Frankenstein novel, the creature treats the prospect of a bride as the solution to all his woes. However, the novel also considers the possibility that the bride might not like him at all. In fact, she may, like everyone else in the novel, be repulsed by his appearance despite her own. He had sworn to quit the neighborhood of man and hide himself in deserts, but she had not. And she, who in all probability was to become a thinking and reasoning animal, might refuse to comply with the compact made before her creation. They might even hate each other. The creature who already lived loathed his own deformity, and might he not conceive a greater abhorrence for it when it came before his eyes in the female form? She also might turn with disgust from him to the superior beauty of man. She might quit him and he be again alone, exasperated by the fresh provocation of being deserted by one of his own species. Even if they were to leave Europe and inhabit the deserts of the New World, yet one of the first results of those sympathies for which the demon thirsted would be children, and a race of devils would be propagated upon the earth, who might make the very existence of the species of man a condition precarious and full of terror. The 1935 film depicts this course of events, and the bride very quickly rejects the creature out of fear. This reaction cements the reality that despite their appearances, both creatures are ultimately human, both in body and in mind. Additionally, throughout the novel, the male creature is consistently compared to both the biblical Adam and Satan. The previous passage suggests that despite being viewed as an Eve to the creature's Adam, a counterpart created solely for his benefit, the bride is to be an intelligent being with her own free will and subsequently independent of him. This was written at a time when married women were not legally treated as separate entities from their husbands in almost all cases, and it asserts a woman's independence of thought. Mary Shelley's father, William Godwin, was openly critical about the institution of marriage, although he wasn't happy about the relationship between Mary and the already married Percy Shelley. Even after the death of Percy's first wife, he and Mary only married in order to take custody of his 2 children from the previous marriage. The depiction of the bride subsequently critiques the legal shackles that marriage inflicted upon women in the early 19th century. I also just want to add that I've always found it kind of funny that Victor's fears about the creature's offspring being a race of devils are completely unfounded. Both creatures are made up of human body parts. Any children they manage to produce are going to be ordinary humans. No one's born stitched up like a patchwork quilt. Not really important to this argument, just something I found myself thinking about. Spoilers for the Universal film Bride of Frankenstein. The 1935 Universal film Bride of Frankenstein, directed by James Whale, is the first screen adaptation to feature the bride. The film is decent. Many people consider it to be better than 1931's Frankenstein, which it serves as a sequel to. I don't think this is because of the bride so much as because it follows the novel a lot more. It includes the DeLacy plotline in which the creature tries to befriend a blind man since he's the only person who won't be afraid of his appearance. The creature is also a lot closer to the book because he learns to talk in this one. In the book, he's extremely eloquent, but a lot of the film adaptations don't allow him to talk at all. In my opinion, you can usually judge the quality of a Frankenstein adaptation based on whether or not the creature can talk. I have seen quite a lot of Frankenstein adaptations, and this largely rings true. The bride is also in this film, obviously. However, unlike the book, this time she is animated. Unfortunately, despite the title, she only appears in the last 5 minutes of the film, and you will spend almost the entire runtime waiting for her to show up. She has a really great design. She's iconic, almost as iconic as the creature, although she does look a lot less monstrous than him. I think this is probably a deliberate decision to prevent her being unattractive. In my opinion, she's criminally underused. All she does is wake up, meet the creature, get scared, honk like a goose, and then presumably die. She never turned up in any of the sequels, so I guess she really was dead. It's disappointing. She only has slightly more to do than in the book. I also think this film missed a trick because they include a framing device where Mary Shelley, her eventual husband Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, etc. talk about the novel, and Mary Shelley is played by Elsa Lanchester, who plays the bride. They could have had the bride and Elizabeth played by the same actress instead. It would have carried on the parallel from the book. Spoilers for the film Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The 1994 film Mary Shelley's Frankenstein actually ran with this idea. I think this is probably the best Frankenstein adaptation to date. It's not quite the most book accurate, it's also not the least book accurate, but it maintains the gothic atmosphere of the book very well. I find it hard to believe that Guillermo del Toro doesn't think that Frankenstein is a gothic novel because it is clearly the gothic novel. I have no idea what he thinks it is if not gothic. It fits the gothic genre better than the science fiction genre, and I will defend my position on this. I have read enough gothic novels to know what the gothic is. Anyway, in this film, Elizabeth's murder takes place before the bride is constructed. In his grief, Victor sews Elizabeth's head onto Justine's body and brings her to life as the female creature. So Elizabeth and the bride are the same character in this, not just doppelgangers. She's played by Helena Bonham Carter in both states. This method also draws comparison between Elizabeth the bride and Justine as the other character to meet her fate at the hands of a man. The bride here is physically a combination of Elizabeth and Justine. Despite its differences to the book, the way this film uses the bride really works. Elizabeth is a much more present character in this version, very probably because of the time in which it was created. If Elizabeth the bride and Justine are all connected as characters, their male equivalents are Victor the creature and Robert Walton, the sea captain who narrates the novel's framing device. He also shares a lot of the characteristics of both Victor and the creature, but particularly Victor. He has that same hubris and ambition that ultimately proves fatal. There are other depictions of the Bride of Frankenstein on film, but I'm not going through every adaptation of Frankenstein. That's not what this video is about. I'm mostly interested in the comparison with Elizabeth and how the depiction has changed over time in a few specific cases. Most of the bride's appearances on film are very minor. I also want to talk about some pieces of media that aren't exactly Frankenstein adaptations. Spoilers for the film Lisa Frankenstein. Finally, we're on to something relatively new. Lisa Frankenstein is about a teenage girl, Lisa, obviously, who has to help a newly revived corpse replace his missing body parts and cover up some murders, and it's a romance, basically. The Bride of Frankenstein appears as a kind of extended metaphor throughout the movie Lisa Frankenstein. The slasher villain who murders Lisa's mother wears a Bride of Frankenstein mask. Lisa sees this mask again during the dream sequence after she's been drugged, and it's also during the sequence that Lisa has her hair piled up in a way that seems reminiscent of the bride. It was only near the end that I started to realize that this was a Bride of Frankenstein film. I'm a little unsure whether the dead guy's name is actually Frankenstein. When Lisa's doing the gravestone rubbing at the beginning, it says Frankenstein, but that might just have been for the title drop because when we see it on her wall later, the first few letters have broken off. But it does still say Stein, so it could be Frankenstein. But then she has a Frankenstein poster on her wall, too, so the story obviously exists. I don't know. I think not giving him a clear name is intended to reference the fact that the creature has no name in the original novel. Either way, at the end they seem to consider themselves married, and at the very end of the film, after her death by tanning bed, we see Lisa revived, wrapped up in bandages, and in full monster mode. So this for me is when she completes her transformation into the Bride of Frankenstein. The film treats it as an empowering thing. A woman becoming a monster is a recurring feature of feminist fiction, perhaps because it's perceived as a rejection of the feminine ideal and feminine beauty. Quite a few of Angela Carter's works touch on this theme, but the most obvious is probably The Tiger's Bride. It's a loose retelling of Beauty and the Beast, except that in the end, instead of the beast becoming human, the beauty becomes a beast. And it's treated as liberating. By removing her outer layer of human skin and revealing the animal within, she is becoming her natural self. We get hints of this throughout Lisa Frankenstein as Lisa becomes more confident and embraces her gothic nature. The change in the way she dresses reflects this, and her final transformation into the female monster completes it. I think they both took the killing too far, but then again, so does the creature in the novel. The ending is also a kind of role reversal because the creature is now indistinguishable from a normal living person. This is the only time in the film that we hear him speak, which I think is intended to show that his own transformation is complete. And it's probably a reference to all the Frankenstein films where the creature isn't allowed to speak. It creates a juxtaposition between the presentation of the creature in the films and in the novel. There are also a lot of homages to silent films in this, so that might be a contributing factor. He's actually reading Lisa a poem that Percy Shelley wrote for Mary, so they're also drawing a comparison with them as a couple. Next, I want to talk about the novel Poor Things by Alistair Gray. Poor Things is told from the perspective of Archibald McCandless, a medical student or doctor, I can't remember whether he's finished university, who falls in love with Bella Baxter. Bella was created when McCandless's friend Godwin Bish Baxter transplanted the brain of an unborn baby into its mother's dead body. Despite promising to marry McCandless, Bella runs away to Europe with some other guy and ends up working in a brothel. That's all you really need to know. I haven't seen the film, so I can't really comment on it that much. The book is a genuine Gothic novel. It really makes use of the genre. I particularly like how it uses a framing device which presents the story as real. This is well known in ARGs and unfiction right now, but it was a staple of Gothic fiction. The Castle of Otranto, the first Gothic novel to coin the name, which isn't very good by the way, opens with the author claiming to have found the story in a medieval Italian manuscript and translated it into English. Dracula is an epistolary narrative that's usually one told through letters, but it also uses diary entries, newspaper clippings, etc. Frankenstein itself is set out as a series of letters. In the case of Poor Things, Gray claims to have found the main text when it was being thrown out by an archive. This is the point at which I do want to talk about what little I know about the film, which is that it cuts out the novel's framing device. The film and the story in general have received a lot of criticism for being a male fantasy that exploits women. These criticisms can definitely be leveled at the novel, too. What you have is an infant's brain in the body of a grown woman. However, the novel contains a letter written by Bella, or Victoria as she is also known, in which she claims that the story isn't true, and that the narrator, McCandless, fabricated most of it and warped the facts beyond recognition. She claims that the brain transplant stuff is all fiction and that she didn't adore her husband the way he suggests she did. It's left ambiguous as to whether or not she's telling the truth. After all, both versions are fiction anyway. But this inclusion does mean that the book feels at least aware of how it comes across. It suggests that what we've been reading may actually have just been McCandless's fantasy, and the letter feels like it's giving Victoria a voice of her own. Still, unlike Frankenstein with its male creature, Poor Things and its female creature were created by a man. Bella isn't a traditional Bride of Frankenstein, but she is a female creation, and I can't help but compare her with the other examples. The first page of the novel is actually a long list of reviews, some positive and some so harshly negative that you have to assume Gray wrote them himself. Instead of asking whether man can make woman, the first review asks, quote, "Can a man make a feminist?" It is the final riddle of a mesmerizing mind game in which not even the heroine, and certainly not the author, can be trusted. The third states that, quote, he satirizes those wealthy Victorian eccentrics who, not knowing how lucky they were, invented the emancipated woman and through her the British Labour Party, a gang of weirdos who kept hugging and dropping the woolly socialism of their founders until Margaret Thatcher made them drop it forever. The heroine of Poor Things is an oversexed blend of Eleanor Marx, Annie Besant, and Alice in Wonderland. Now, this is definitely a fake review. It's even credited to Private Nose as opposed to Private Eye, so self-aware. Is Bella an emancipated woman discovering the world, or is she a creepy fantasy? Gray seems to have realized that she could be both. With the coexistence of McCandless's narrative and Victoria's letter, she gets to be both at once in the novel. It serves as a reminder that Frankenstein didn't create the creature. Mary Shelley did. Mary Shelley, who was in her own way an emancipated woman exploring Europe. In a way, Bella is a bride. She is defined by her relationships with men, which is usually the case for Frankenstein's brides. Much like Elizabeth and the Bride, Bella and Victoria serve as doppelgangers. In some ways the same person, and in other ways two entirely separate individuals. In Frankenstein, Victor creates a human being without the need for a woman or a womb. It can be no accident that the previous owner of Bella's body and the mother of her brain is named Victoria, as Victor's female counterpart. She is Bella's creator just as much as Godwin Bish Baxter, if not more so. While Godwin's first name is actually Mary Shelley's maiden name, once again implying Mary's status as the creature's true creator, and his middle name is that of Percy Shelley, Bella usually refers to him as God. The implication that by being her earthly creator, Godwin is also Bella's god is so lacking in subtlety that it is repeatedly pointed out in the novel. Yet Godwin is also Bella's destroyer. He himself states that he could have revived her as a baby, yet he chose to transplant her brain into her mother's body for no reason other than his own scientific interest. In doing so, he allows her original body to die and significantly limits her lifespan. As such, Bella, like the other brides of Frankenstein, is destroyed by a man. I also can't help but think that the main narrative of the novel is implying that Godwin himself is unknowingly a monster created by his own father. He looks monstrous, and he's described as having a very strange anatomy overall, an anatomy that shouldn't really be physically possible. He also knows very little about his mother, and it's considered quite surprising that his father ever had a relationship. For all her absence from the original novel, the Bride of Frankenstein has become a character in her own right, though still defined by the men around her. She remains something of a tabula rasa, a blank slate not dissimilar to how the male creature begins, but made all the more mysterious and with so much potential and opportunity for reinterpretation precisely because of her lack of development. Ultimately, the Bride has become a much more active character, reflecting changing cultural expectations surrounding womanhood. Where she was originally sidelined and depicted as a victim of male hubris, she has become an equal, and a protagonist in her own right. This turned into much more of a feminist critique than I originally intended. I think that's just the way it goes when you're talking about female characters in Frankenstein. Okay, bye!